Hi, this is Whitney from Purl Soho. I'm going to demonstrate how to work a provisional cast-on. When you use a provisional cast-on, you're basically putting your first row or round of stitches on hold so that later you can go back and use them. There are a couple of ways to work a provisional cast-on, but the version I'll demonstrate here is what we call the one-step method. With this method, you cast directly onto your needles, and like it sounds, we think this is the simplest way to do a provisional cast-on. So, to get started, you'll need some smooth scrap yarn similar in weight to the main yarn of your project, a crochet hook appropriate in size for the scrap yarn, and the knitting needles required for the pattern you're working. Okay, let's get started. Begin with a slip knot on the crochet hook. You don't need to leave too much of a tail here, and you don't want to be too tight. Now, grab your knitting needle in your left hand and hang on to the tail just to keep it out of the way. Cross the crochet hook in front of the knitting needle and hold onto it with your left hand. With your right hand, bring the yarn behind the knitting needle and wrap it to the front of the crochet hook. Use the hook to pull the yarn through the slip knot. You've cast one stitch onto your knitting needle. Let's do that again. Cross the crochet hook in front of the knitting needle, bring the yarn behind, then around to the front, and use the crochet hook to pull the yarn through the loop. Keeping the loop on the crochet hook nice and loose, repeat these steps until you have the right number of stitches for your project. Make sure not to cast on too tight or it will be tricky to work the first round. Okay, I'm going to cast on the number of stitches I need and I'll be back to show you the next step. Okay, once you've cast on all the stitches you need, use the crochet hook to chain a few stitches at the end here. Just a few simple crochet chain stitches. Then you can cut your yarn and pull your tail through. And that is your provisional cast-on. At this point, you'll want to refer back to your pattern because now you'll be joining the main yarn and beginning to knit. Some patterns, like our dumpling bag for example, might ask you to leave a certain length tail when you join the main yarn, so be sure to check that out. To begin knitting, you grab your main yarn and starting at the chain end of the cast-on, knit directly into the stitches on the needle. Just like you normally would knit into your cast-on row. Just pretend that the scrap yarn stitches are a regular cast-on and knit away until you reach the end of your stitches. Now let's say that your pattern has you knit all the cast-on stitches and then join to work in the round. In that case, at the end of the first row, you join as you normally would by first making sure the stitches aren't twisted around the needle, then placing a marker for the end of round, then knitting the first stitch of the round. Simple. You are ready to go. So now I've knit my piece and I'm finally ready to use the cast-on stitches. To do that, we have to remove the scrap yarn and get the live stitches safely onto our needles. So first turn your work so the cast-on stitches are at the top and find the end of the round. Then, with your working needle, pick up the right side of the first main yarn stitch, which is right here. Then continue like you're weaving over a strand and under a strand, picking up the right leg of each stitch in that first round. Over a leg and under a leg until you have picked up all of the stitches in the round. Okay, I've gotten all of the stitches onto my needles and I've double checked that I have the right number of stitches. And so the next thing to do is to get this scrap yarn off of my piece. So to do that, you gently pull the last stitch of your chain, you undo that, and you start pulling like this, and it should just unravel right from your stitches all the way around like this, kind of like magic. It's just coming right out. And what you're left with on your needles are live stitches all ready to go. So sometimes this means that what you're going to do is fold your work in and make a hem, or maybe you're adding an edge that you weren't sure about before you started the piece. Or for things like bags and the toes of socks, maybe you're dividing the stitches in half and closing the bottom with either Kitchener stitch or a 3-needle bind off. Well, whatever you're doing next, that's it. That is a one-step provisional cast on, very handy and nothing to be scared about.